In his book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, Carl Trueman writes that the intuitive moral structure of our modern social imaginary places a premium on the individual's right to define his or her own existence. And we also recognize that questions about identity are also questions about dignity and how we should live and treat and respond to everyone who is around us. And so the question today is going to be, how should we engage on this topic of identity, our ability to define our own existence, or should our identity actually be grounded in something deeper? This is the next part of my culture series, walking through this book, What Do I Say When? A Parent's Guide to Navigating Cultural Chaos and for Children and Teens by Andrew and Christian Walker. Now, this is I forget what part this is, but if you are new here to this show, or to this series at least, we have talked about topics of human dignity, abortion, sexuality, homosexuality, and now this is identity. And so we're going to be walking through this here little book in the main points that it makes, looking at questions about identity and how do we make sense of our identities throughout this, and how to then, as Christians, should we engage when people have identities that are different. As always, I'm going to be taking about 30 or so minutes to walk through this topic, and then I want to get to your questions and your calls. And so there is the ability for you to post your question in the live chat with a Q at the beginning so I can find it easily and respond. Or if you want to join the show as a guest and chat with me and talk through what's on your mind, then you can use the link that is there in the live chat as well and join me. All right, so quick before I jump into the topic. It is so good to be back. I don't know the last time that I've taken like a whole month off from live streaming, but I have. And again, if you're just clicking on this video randomly, then you maybe didn't notice that I was gone for a month. But if you have been following this channel and like seeing the content come out each week, then hey, there's been a little bit of a gap. The last 2 weeks of May, I was in my third and final year of my doctoral residency. And so I was in classes from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Every day for 2 weeks. And so I missed the last 2 weeks of May for that. And so my residency is done. My coursework is done. And now I am finally in dissertation phase. And so I have, well, I guess until I finish. There's no more due dates. I just have to write a dissertation and turn it in, and then I graduate. I'm shooting for a year and a half of research and writing, and hopefully graduating in December of 2026. So that is why I missed the last 2 weeks of May. And then as far as the first 2 weeks of June, I flew to Colorado for about 10 days, and I just got back, and I was leading an apologetics immersive experience for MAVEN. And what this is, and I want to take some time and talk about this more because we had some fascinating conversations. And so maybe if you're watching this, check the community tab because I want to post some things that happened on this trip. And I'm curious if you have questions or thoughts about them. But the MAVEN program that I direct is the Immersive Experience program. And we have apologetic worldview and theological or biblical immersive experiences. And this is where we train students in either theology, apologetics, or worldview, and then we give them an experience. We take them somewhere and make them actually engage with the things that they have learned and engage with people who think differently. And so I was leading an apologetics immersive experience in Colorado, where they went out into different public places, downtown Fort Collins, CU Boulder, and Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and engaged people in conversations on the street or on campus, just sitting down saying, hey, we're Christians here from North Dakota, and chatting with people about what they believe. Can we have some time and ask you some questions? And so the students had about a 3 or so hour window each day where they just randomly approach people for conversations, as well as we invite speakers to come in. So the first speaker that came in was an atheist who deconverted from Christianity, grew up in a Christian home and deconstructed, and as a graduate with a degree in philosophy from Colorado State University, and had a lot of psychology, and had a lot of psychological objections to God, namely divine hiddenness. And he believed that if God was all-knowing and all-powerful, that he would have revealed himself better, that he would not remain so hidden, that he would have given us a better Bible. And so he was able to present his reasons for why he walked away from Christianity. and then engage the students in questions. On the next day, we went to a mosque where we had a Muslim and his college-age son, not just college age, but college student son, engage in questions and conversations on the Christian versus Islam debate and discussion on prayer, the reliability of the Bible, evidence for the resurrection, and those sort of fun topics. The next day, we had a speaker come in who is a pastor of a Unity church. You may not be familiar with the Unity movement, but really is a kind of a pantheistic idea, a pantheistic worldview, believing that he is God, that humans have a divine spark within them, that the power of our thinking actually has the ability to create and change and heal diseases and raise ourselves from the dead and these sort of things that he discussed and allowed our students to engage with him. And then the final day, we had 3 members of the Boulder Atheists come in and talk to the students. One of those members was also a deconverted Christian, and about college, or actually post-college is when he walked away from the faith and is now identifying as an atheist. And he gave his reasons why he thinks the apologetic arguments are no good. And specifically the evidence for the resurrection and the reliability of the Bible. Another one of the atheists presented on kind of what is a secular humanist and how we can all be good and have reason and ethics and rights and these sort of things within a secular framework. There's no need for God for that. And then the third atheist sat there and watched. He didn't give a presentation, but during the Q&A portion, he jumped in and participated. And he actually had been born and raised in an atheist home, and that's all he really understood and knew. The second guy, I think he said he deconstructed when he's about 7 or so, is when he started realizing what his parents were teaching him was not true. And so anyways, we had some fascinating speakers and conversations. That was a 7-day trip. I was in Colorado a total of 10 days. And so that's why I missed the first 2 weeks of June. And so that has been my last month. It's been fun. So again, check the community tab. I'm going to be posting kind of a little bit about that. And if there's specific questions that you have regarding our speakers or what they think, I'm kind of going to take a show maybe the beginning of July, I don't know, and walk through that trip and kind of some of the things that were taught and discuss and respond to some of the objections that were brought up. All right. So just really quick before I again jump into the show, looking at some of the upcoming topics. Where are the books that I just set down somewhere? Of course they're gone. Okay. Here's the plan. This series on culture, today is the topic of identity, as I mentioned. Now, we did skip the chapter on gender, and that is because I've been wanting to interview Abigail Favali, who wrote the book, The Genesis of Gender, because I found her book to just be absolutely fascinating. We have had to postpone that interview twice now. There's been scheduling conflicts, there's been illness, and so now we are shooting for sometime in the fall. And so we're going to kind of get through this summer, and we're going to rebook that interview in the fall. And so we did skip chapter 4 on gender. But the remaining chapters then are gender, transgenderism, technology, political engagement, and hostility and persecution. So that's kind of what this fall is going to look like, 1 chapter a month out of this book. And so we're talking about identity today. Next month will be on transgenderism, and then we'll kind of move on from there. As well as I'm walking through the Reclaiming the Christian Intellectual Traditions series. This is our worldview series. Next week is going to be the next part of the series, looking specifically at the Christian worldview of how has the Christian intellectual tradition shaped our understanding of a Christian worldview. Now, again, those of you who follow on Instagram may have voted in this. I always put up like, hey, what books do you want next? And here are the next 2 books that got votes. So July is walking through this one. How has the Christian intellectual tradition shaped media, journalism, and communications? And then in August, it is how has the Christian intellectual tradition shaped psychology? So I have the next 3 books for this series that all came in. That's going to be fun. Looking forward to that. Now, the one other change I'll say is that the apologetic series, walking through the Blackwell Companion for Natural Theology, is going to be put on pause. I am starting my dissertation phase, as I mentioned, of my program, and I have my first big assignment. I said there's no due dates, but I need to get it done by the end of July. And so I have about a month and a half to research and write the first portion of that. And that series, those chapters are like 100 pages each. And it took me, I feel like about 10 hours to read, prep, and prepare for the last show that I did on the Kalam cosmological argument. So I'm going to be putting that series on hold for just a moment. because really my priority is my dissertation. And so I do need to get working on that. And so I'll just kind of pick that up as I go throughout the next couple of years, probably. There's 10 arguments I want to get to. And so that is what that is going to look like is that's not going to be a consistent every single month. But when I have some time to kind of work my way through one of those chapters and approach it and talk to you about it, then that's what's going to happen. But until then, that series is going to be put on pause because it is just a lot right now. So I think that's all of my announcements. I think that's everything that I wanted to tell you about. So with that, let me jump into this topic of identity. So again, Andrew Christian Walker, quick little background. Andrew Walker is a PhD from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's Associate Professor of Christian Ethics and Public Theology at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and a Fellow with the Ethics and Public Policy Center. His wife, Christian Walker, is an accomplished curriculum writer, elementary school educator, former children's ministry leader, and teaches at a classical Christian school in Louisville, Kentucky, where they reside. And so they have put together this short little book. And again, it's been a while since I've talked through this. What's nice is they do a brief introduction. They hit some core foundational kind of biblical principles of what does the Bible have to say about this. And then they break it down very nicely in that they have what they call first floor, second floor, and third floor truths. And so first floor would be, I forget exactly, for like really little kids up to like 8 or so years old. Second floor is like if your kids are like 8 to 12, here's some things that they should know. And then if your kids are like over 12, like high school and above, here's some third floor truths. And so it's really nice how it's kind of broken down, speaking to parents. But they jump into this chapter on identity. And I think what is important to think through with this topic of just like this idea of be your authentic self, be your true self, follow your heart, just do what you want to do, I think is fundamentally destructive. And it leads to a lot of pressure placed upon individuals as they try to find their identity and live out that identity in a way that is trying to accord with their desires. And it's tough. It is really, really hard. And they address here at this kind of introductory section about how our modern understanding of identity is what some scholars are referring to as this expressive individualism. Carl Trueman wrote this book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, where he talks about this idea of cultural amnesia, expressive individualism, and the road to the sexual revolution. And he talks about this, radical expressive individualism and what that is doing and ultimately where it stems from. Now, as they define here in this book, and this is actually taken from Yuval Levin and the Fractured Republic book, here's how they want to define expressive individualism. It is the desire to pursue one's own path, but also a yearning for fulfillment through the definition and articulation of one's own identity. It is a drive both to be more like whatever you already are and also to live in society by fully asserting who you are. The capacity of individuals to define the terms of their own existence by defining their personal identities is increasingly equated with liberty and with the meaning of some of our basic rights, and it is given pride of place in our self-understanding. And so this is how Yuval Levin defines expressive individualism. Now, in Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, hi, Sergio, He really traces this back to a lot of different authors, and this is not a review of that book or a series on that book, and so I'm not going to go deeply into it. But one of the authors that he really traces this back to is Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, if I say that right, who was an important figure in the history of philosophy, his contributions to political philosophy and moral philosophy. And so Rousseau had a lot to write during the Enlightenment time. And what Trueman addresses is that for Rousseau and these ideas that go back to the Enlightenment, Rousseau argued that the individual is at his best and is most truly himself when he acts in accordance with his nature. This idea of like, hey, when you are acting in accordance with your nature, that is when you are most truly yourself. And Rousseau then lays this foundation of expressive individualism through his notion that an individual is most authentic when acting out in public those desires and feelings that are characterized by his inner psychological self, right? So your true nature is this deep down psychological self, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, and this is who you are. And therefore, to be your authentic self, to be true to yourself, to live out that true identity is then grounded in when you are living out those desires and those feelings that you have. And so this really comes into contrast with different ways of looking at identity, right? Where there's what's called the mimetic view, where this is that the world has a given order, and we need to see human beings as discovering the meaning that, and then conforming to that meaning, right? So there's one view that says, look, our world is created in a certain way, and our job, our role as people is to discover what it means, to discover what is actually in reality, and then we need to conform ourselves to a discovered reality. And so like a simple way to understand this would be like gravity, for example, right? We don't get to make up gravity. This is something that we don't get to invent. We recognize this is something that is true about reality. And now I need to live in accordance with that. I don't just, gravity doesn't go away when I want to jump off a building, but we can do things and we can, skydive, and things can happen a part of reality because we're living in a created world in which has a built-in aspect of reality that we conform to, that we make sense of, that we understand, and we live in accordance with. The other view is called poiesis. The poetic view, and is by contrast, sees the world so much as raw material out of which meaning and purpose can be created by the individual. So again, this is one of those fundamental disagreements that we have on this, and how we're going to look at identity is the world really this material that we can create, that we can form, and that we can make as individuals, and we can turn it into whatever we want? Or is this something that is created that we have to discover, right? A simple illustration again is to say, is it more like gravity, or is it more like a stop sign? Or sometimes I say on the show, is it more like gravity, or is it more like Monopoly? Right? Is this something that we discovered that we live in accordance with, or is this something that we have invented like Monopoly and we get to make the rules? And even if there are rules by the game, you can change those, and you can have house rules, and you can kind of do the things that you want to do, and you can change how it works, and you can change how much money you want to make. And so that's the fundamental question we have to ask here is what is, or who are we? Who are we? Are we people that have been created, that we have to discover our identity and then align ourselves with that built-in aspect of reality? Or can we create whatever sort of meaning we want? This is that idea within psychology, this idea of a plastic person whose figure can vary and change, and we can remake our personal identity at will. And so this is some of the things that Rousseau discusses and defended and explained back in the Enlightenment that Truman is hitting on. Now, in a contrast, kind of the Abigail Favale approach, that again, I want to interview her this fall, and she talks about gender and identity not being something that is plastic that we can make, but really something that is grounded in reality. And this is why I think this show is important. This is why worldview conversations are so important. This is why I love being able to stick my students in front of Muslims and Mormons and atheists last week and pantheists. Abigail Favale argued that in the ancient mind, origin stories of origin, are ultimately stories of identity and purpose, that we cannot understand who we are or what we are made for without understanding where we come from. And this is still true. The question is, can we understand who we are and what we are for unless we understand where we come from? And this is why questions of world religions or pantheism, right? The unity pastor that we talked to was like, I am God, and this is now going to greatly shape his identity and also his purpose on what he's trying to do here. This is the same with the atheists that we talked to and their understanding of where we come from within an atheistic or a secular framework, a naturalist understanding that we are all physical beings. And then there's Big Bang cosmology, the origin of life, and then evolution takes place, and we are just kind of advanced primates. This is also going to shape our identity and also our purpose. So again, thanks for the questions, Sergio. I'll come to those here in a second, and Mirza, good to see you here as well. Actually, that's a really good question. So let me jump over here. This is so good. Thank you, Sergio and Mirza. So Sergio says, I think that it's a false dichotomy. It seems to be the universe has rules, but one, that doesn't mean that they are either created or that they don't translate into normative claims. So three, we can transform the world to a point. And I think Mirza also addresses this on the false dichotomy question, is why can't it be both discovered and shaped? I know that gravity exists, and I also prefer certain foods over others. So that is a good question, is when it comes to our personal identity, who am I? What am I made for? And who am I? The question is there a discovered reality? Now, I'm not saying, I think this is a good question, is it doesn't have to be fully and completely, like every single detail about my life is discovered and I can't choose certain things. I don't think that's true. But is it completely up to me of who I am and my purpose in life and what I want to do? Or is there, in a sense, a combination of both? But I think the point here is it completely up to me and I create my own reality? Or is there a discovered aspect that should inform everything else? So in a Christian view, it would be there's a discovered aspect that I'm created, and the purpose of life is to know God and make him known. Now, how do I make him known? That's different. I'm on YouTube. Other people are on the streets preaching. Other people are, doing it very differently. But the question is there a fundamental call on our lives that we all have the same purpose, is to be in a relationship with God, and our identity is human beings created in the image of God? Or am I not in the image of God and it's something different? So I think that's kind of the question that we're asking here, is that is there a grounded aspect that we'll talk about, or is it completely up to the individual? Abigail Favali goes on. A couple more things I want to share from her, and then we'll jump back into this book. She goes on and says that Christ turned, so Jesus, then, if we want to look to Jesus as Christians, he constantly pointed back to Genesis. And we saw this in Matthew chapter 19, where Jesus was asked about divorce and if it's lawful to get divorced. And Jesus points back and says, well, have you not heard from the beginning? He who created the male and female, what God has joined together, let man not separate. That was my paraphrase. And she says, Christ turns towards Genesis is a significant move. She writes, he does not appeal to law when confronted with questions about how men and women should relate to one another. He appeals to cosmology, to the sacred narratives of Genesis that give account of identity and purpose as human beings. Genesis still speaks the truth about men and women, about who we are created to be. And so again, this is that fundamental question of, does Genesis actually have anything meaningful to say? If yes, then we are created by God in his image, and this has significance in how we live and what we are, how we identify and how we see our purpose. Or is Genesis a bunch of nonsense? We're not created by God. We are products of evolution. We are plastic people. There's not a designed reality that has any sort of givens that we have to discover. Instead, it is completely and ultimately up to us. Now, Favali goes on and says, look, first and foremost, she goes, the paradigm of creating identity is a godless one, she says. This is taken for granted, that we are not created beings. We are products of social forces. Reality, gender, and sex, and everything, even truth, is socially constructed. If this is our view that is socially constructed of how we are, she says, then a denial of God leads to denial of nature. Now, by nature, she writes, I do not mean the natural world of plants and animals, but rather the idea of a human nature. The notion that some aspects of human identity are pre-social and intrinsic, influenced by social forces, yet, but not wholly created by them. And so this idea that she says, look, if our worldviews are, does God exist or does he not exist? This actually has a huge impact in this question of identity. If I do not have a God-given human nature, then everything is socially constructed. And then the question is then, where are the limits to that social constructed? In a Christian view, though, Favali argues, this is my last point from Favali, that Christianity is thoroughly teleological. This is the end goal, or purposeful. There's a purpose or end goal to Christian creation of how God has created us to be. She writes this: the whatness of a thing, its essential identity, is connected to its purpose. In Aristotelian terms, this is known as the fourth and final cause, the final end toward which something is directed. The final cause is easy to discern with simple objects. A teleos of a chair is to uphold a person in a seated position. A chair is designed to fulfill its singular purpose. What about human beings? What are we designed for? Right? And that's the fundamental question. Are we designed for something? And therefore, we have to understand that what are we designed for question in order to live out our design well? Or is it, no, you're not designed for anything. You can do what you want to do. Again, I think a helpful illustration that I often give, and it's an illustration I think I stole from somewhere. I don't remember where at this point. I think Sean McDowell. But people often say it's helpful, is the question of a train. And I always ask groups, is a train most free when it is on the tracks, or is it off the tracks? Now, everyone always says on the tracks. It's clear. A train is free when it's on the tracks. Now, what if you said, well, the tracks are limiting, the tracks are restricting, the tracks are confining, the tracks take the train where they would go, not wherever the train wants to go. I want to free the train from the limitation and the confining nature of the train tracks, and I want to place it on the street. And then you recognize that's silly. And most time people start laughing because it's like, well, then the train is stuck. It won't go anywhere. Now it's just going to sit there and rust. Why? A train is not created for train tracks. The train is not created for the street. It's created for the tracks. And so while the tracks do limit it and confine it and restrict it, the tracks are actually what set the train free. This is the fundamental question of our identity and how we often in our culture, I think we confuse our identity because we misunderstand what does it mean to be free. Our culture, we have a very good understanding of what's called freedom from, free from restrictions. That if I am in handcuffs, I'm not free because I don't have a freedom from those sort of restrictions and handcuffs. But what we often miss, and where I think this question does matter of creation and God, a secular view or at least a Christian view, and I know there's others mixed in there between, is what's called freedom for. Are you created for a reason? And therefore, to be truly free is to do what you are created to do. Like the train is truly free when it's doing what it is created to do. Is there a teleos? Is there a purpose? What are we as humans designed for? If you understand what we're designed for, then we not only have freedom from, but freedom for. That leads to true freedom. A denial of God, a rejection of a Christian, at least, view of God and creation, or a secular view that says, no, we're not created for a reason. We are the product of evolution, and there's no teleos there, I think radically then changes our understanding of freedom to where all we have is freedom from. There's not a freedom for. And then we often see anything that confines or restricts our understanding of freedom or our ability to truly do whatever we want to do as being a limitation or a problem, including our bodies, including identity, including a lot of those sort of factors. And so then the goal is this radical kind of expressive individualism to do what we want to do. So back to this book. And again, I see more questions coming in. And these are good. And I'm going to get to those here in a second. Let me at least get through the introduction. I'll look over the questions and then I'll walk through their kind of biblical principles that they lay out. And then we'll take your calls and your questions at the end. So again, if you want to jump in the queue to call, we can do that as well. Here they write, this is the central ethic. This expressive individualism is the central ethic that guides our society's thinking in contemporary America. The idea that a person would be limited by an authority outside of him or herself without whether a tradition, a religion, or a parent to do or experience whatever he or she wants amounts to one of the worst offenses an authority can commit. I've heard this before. I don't know about you. I'm curious if you would agree to this or not, that kind of our current cultural ethic that any sort of limitation by an authority, whether that's an authority of a parent, a religion, or some sort of tradition, any sort of limitation of you by some authoritarian figure, he says, is one of the worst offenses that an authority can commit. Our authorities should be setting people free to live out their true selves, to do what they want to do. And so he says the question should immediately be asked ourselves is whether expressive individualism can be consistently lived out. That is an interesting question. Can we actually consistently live this out? Now, the point here, and I think I put this in the thumbnail title, I don't know, I created that thumbnail a month ago and I thought I was going to do this show, is this idea of, is our culture confused? Is there a moral confusion because of our focus on identity? If we are really emphasizing and prioritizing identity, and identity does not have a ground in nature, but is able to be lived out by people however they want to live it out, has this led to a cascading moral confusion where we are just confused in society on who we are, how we are, or what it even looks like to live out our identities, especially when our identities come into conflict. Is there a better way to go about this? They go on here again and say, assuring that someone's feelings are not hurt, but rather affirmed, appears to be the highest good in which our society aspires. We need to affirm those sort of feelings. This pronounced focus on the self as a thing that must be satisfied above all else has led to an age of coddling, fragility, and moral confusion. I think, even non-Christian Jonathan Haidt talks about this in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, of how we are coddling and trying to protect because you don't want to speak against individuals. And he even argues, no, we can't be coddling in this way. It's creating a fragility that is breaking us. We have to be able to speak up for what is true and what is right. And so they get into the final point here of the introductory section. From a Christian view, we must be asking fundamental questions, or when it comes to training up our students, just asking them these fundamental questions. Who owns us? Who defines what is good for us? And then they say there's ultimately kind of two big options that our culture is at least experiencing. Number one is a secular view, which is identity and goodness are self-determined. No one owns you. No one should be an authority over you, and you get to define what is good for you. It is self-determined. So the question is it fully and completely self-determined? Or in a Christian view, is our identity and goodness God-determined? At least a part of it, or a fundamental part of my identity is determined by God. A fundamental part of what is good for us is determined by God. And then within that framework, then there's freedom I have to make sort of choices and sort of decisions as I move forward. And so how do we approach this conversation? This is what I think is hugely important. So let me jump back over to the questions that came in here. Again, if you have a question, put a Q, because I'm already seeing a lot of comments coming in, and I don't have the time. I don't want to just sit here reading comments and have you staring at me as I read comments. And so if you have a specific question or comment you want me to address or see, put a Q before it. All righty, let's see. All right, Mirza asks, do things like freedom and purpose actually exist in objective reality, or are they just concepts in our minds to help us navigate the world? Again, I think, Mirza, this is such a good question. I think in a Christian view that freedom and purpose are objective facts of reality and actually exist. And the point and the reason is because that we are created by God. He designed us. He created us. There is a teleos. There's an end goal, an end purpose there. And therefore, because we are made for a purpose, then you can say there's an objective purpose. And we see that in scriptures that why did God make us? He made us to be in a relationship with him. He made us to know him and make him known. Or as I think another catechism says that God created us to know him and enjoy him forever. And so if the Christian story is true and God created us for the purpose of being in a relationship with him and to make disciples of all nations, to know him and make him known, then I would say that no, there is an actual objective purpose that exists in reality that you are either doing or not doing. Right? The same thing with a chair or any sort of created thing. There's a reason why this coffee mug here was made. There's a reason why there's a handle. Why is there a handle on coffee mugs? Well, because if there's not, this is going to get pretty hot versus a glass that you drink, maybe cold water or cold drinks, doesn't need a handle because, well, your hand's not going to burn if you grab it. And so in created things, there is an objective purpose. And so I think this is the fundamental question is if there is no creator, if we are the product of evolution, then I would say that there is no objective purpose. And then you have your own subjective purpose. You have your own personal purposes. Why do I want to live my life, or what is going to be good for me, or what do I want to do? But ultimately, there is no ultimate purpose within a secular framework. And so I would say that true freedom and purpose actually do exist. The same thing in that I mentioned with freedom of the train, that we recognize to be truly free, that there are things that actually take away from freedom. I think most people should recognize this. Is there an objective understanding of freedom? Well, yes. If you are locked up in jail, you're not free. If you are a slave, you're not free. If you are an owned property, you're not free. There's a sense in which we understand what is free and what is not free. The question is that we recognize freedom for, right? Freedom from. Almost everyone recognizes freedom from, that there's a certain sense of freedom that if you are not free from bondage, free from restrictions, if you're not free from jail, then there's a sense in which you're not free. But then the question is there what's called a freedom for? Can we actually say that I'm made for a reason, and therefore for me to be truly free is to live out in accordance with my design? And again, the training analogy is supposed to kind of address that. So I would actually say that freedom and purpose are not just concepts in our minds to help us navigate the world, but because God did create us and grounds this, that there is a true objective reality, not just a concept. So that would be my understanding here. All right. I don't see more cues, and so I'm going to jump on to their points. Okay, so what are the main biblical principles that they have? And again, this is the last section here. I'm going to address some main biblical principles that they throw out there when it comes to identity, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the show chatting and talking with you all. So biblical principle number 1. The Bible provides a comprehensive and stable account of human identity. And it says, look, the Genesis account provides the building blocks to understand who we are and what we are made for. There's that freedom for. Number 1, what does Genesis teach us? We exist as persons for whom life itself is valuable for its own sake. So we are persons created in the image of God. Well, that was point number 2. We are made in God's image as either male or female. And so there's a value here as we are created by God, male or female. And then number 3, our existence as male, female allows us to form families, build cultures for the sake of God's glory. And so they argue here that existence, identity, and family. So God created us, made us in his image, male and female, for the purpose of families. So existence, identity, and family are essential building blocks for rooting one's sense and place in the world. Now, in part 1 of the series, when we talked about human dignity, they go further to make this idea that in Genesis chapter 1, the fact that we are created in the image of God actually confers dignity, moral duty, and an ultimate reference point for understanding who we are. So again, I think as we kind of keep going back over this main point, I think it is really important is the question is, what is ultimate dignity? And so the atheists that came in and chatted with my group from Boulder Atheists, they talked about secular humanism. And they said, within secular humanism, we have 5 principles. I have it written down somewhere. But it was human reason, that we are reason, that we have morality. They did believe in the sense of objective morality, and that we have rights as humans and dignity as humans. Now I pushed back and I said, okay, so you believe that we have human rights. I said, where do rights come from? They said, well, individual rights come from the authority. They come from the government. Okay, so if that's the question, that if only the government gives rights because the government is the highest authority in a secular view, then the question is, what does someone have rights if the government has not given it to them? So before women had the right to vote, they didn't have the right to vote. So how could they sit there and claim, hey, we have the right to vote? Or slaves, I have the right to be free. No, you don't. The government has not given you a right to be free. That's the only place the rights come from. So therefore you don't have the right to be free. Who are you to claim that you have the right to be free when you haven't been given that right? So I asked them, where do rights come from? Right. And they said, well, that's really tough. That's a hard one. And all you can argue is, well, yes, they don't have the right, but maybe it would be better if they did. That a society in which everyone has rights is a better society than a society that not everyone has rights. And so you can't actually argue that they do have the right, because they don't. But maybe you could argue that they should have the right. The challenge here I think within a secular view is that to say something is better assumes that there's a standard of best. We're now going back to this morality of assuming there's some sort of transcendent objective standard by which we can judge something. So just like if I said I was bowling and I'm getting better at bowling. And you're like, oh, really? What'd you bowl? And I'm like, oh, last week or last month, I bowled a 120. And then today I bowled a 70. Now, if you know the bowling, which I think most people do, you're like, you're not getting better. That's worse, because we recognize there's an objective standard for bowling that 300 is the best, and the closer to 300, the better you are. And so the question is, within a secular framework, if there is no God, what is the best? And where do we get this objective framework for grounding what is the best? And therefore we can judge it and say a society in which everyone has rights is better than a society which not all have rights. But I think the fundamental thing here that I'm trying to point out that came up in the conversation is that there is an intrinsic dignity and a moral duty within a creation view that God created us in his image. And that is who we are as image bearers of God, that you have intrinsic value. The other conversation that came up with the atheists is that, if that we are not created by God, if God does not exist and we are not created in his image, then do we have intrinsic value? And the three atheists, at least from Boulder Atheists, all disagreed with each other. But I think two of them argued that, no, you don't have intrinsic value, that you are valuable based on how society sees you as valuable. So if you have lots of degrees, then you are more valuable to society and you should get paid more. If you have better skills, then you should get paid more because you're seen as more valuable. Your value as a human is not anything inside of you because of your inherent dignity as simply being a human being, but your value is based on your usefulness, your productivity to society. Now, the fundamental question that has to then come back from that is to say, okay, well, what if someone does not have value to society? What if they are disabled? What if they are old? What if they have illnesses? Or what if they are too young? Then they have lost that value. Why should we see them as valuable? And so it's here that recognizing the Bible actually provides a stable account of human identity that then leads to human dignity, human value, and now moral duties. How should I now treat that person? Well, I have to treat them as a valuable human being created in the image of God. The question is, how ought I treat people if they are not created in God's image? If there is no moral authority over us, then is there you should treat them well because you want to be treated well? Is this just a social contract theory of just, well, do good because it'll be done to you? Or is there a deeper grounding for how I ought to treat people because of their identity as being created by God? Now, that's a little bit off topic, but I thought it was an interesting conversation. So I challenged these three atheists with the question of, they kept arguing, well, you should treat people well because we come together as a society. And they said that all laws are simply just kind of socially constructed. It's social contract theory that people come together. My pushback was, okay, if that's how we create laws, do you think it's okay for the majority to use their power to oppress the minority? Well, most people are going to say, no way, you can't do that. Well, here's the issue. Isn't that what every single law ultimately is within a secular view of morality? If there is no objective morality, if there's no objective outside transcendent standard that we discover and therefore implement, but all laws and all morals and all moral duty and how you should and should not treat people is simply a decision of the government, well, then the government is deciding and using its power to force everyone to obey when there is not consensus. And so the majority are using their power to oppress the minority. And they came back and said, well, no, but the goal is that society comes together and forms a consensus. And so I asked back, I said, is a consensus ever achieved? Do we ever have a perfect 100% consensus in which there are no dissenting voices? And they said, well, pretty much not. I said, okay, so then almost every single scenario, you're going to have a dissenting voice that creates a minority that is then going to be oppressed or forced to comply based on the majority who now has the power. And so the very thing that you stand against as a secular humanist is the foundation for how morality functions within that framework of just, well, the majority decide and therefore everyone who disagrees, well, I'm sorry, you lost And if you want your way, well, you got to get more people on board. But until then, here's what you have to do, because that's what the majority decided. So this, I think, is interesting. And I think ultimately what grounds this first point to say that our dignity, our moral duties, our identity ultimately has a stability in a Christian view, because it doesn't just change from government to government, or administration to administration, or opinion to opinion, or election to election, and create this instability where people's values and dignities are constantly changing based on whatever laws are on the books. But rather, no matter what the law is, we have a way in which we can actually judge that law as being good or bad, right or wrong, as being taking away people's rights rather than giving rights, because there's actually a higher standard of rights found in God. Number two, their second point that they make is that biblical love does not mean affirming non-biblical identities. Now, here's where I think I want to challenge the Christians a bit. They write here, to love your friends properly is to give your friends what they are owed, truth. Truth is always a healing balm, even if rejected. Love rejoices in the truth, 1 Corinthians 13:6. And regardless of whether your friends or neighbors interpret your actions or words as loving, Christians must always operate from that motivation. Now, I hear a lot of times this idea in Christianity that, yes, we are supposed to come in both love and truth, or truth and love, but the loving thing is to just tell them the truth. And so we often say, well, no, I'm loving them by simply telling them the truth. And then all we care at that point is what is true. And I just want to try to challenge and encourage everybody, including Christians out there who maybe have this view, that yes, it is loving to give the truth, but there's also a way in which you give the truth that you can add offense to it that I think is often or sometimes unnecessary. And so the question is, how do we actually give the truth? How do we be loving in giving the truth and give the truth in love? I think it's a both and. And again, I've told stories many times on the show before, and if you want me to tell it again, you can say, tell the story about giving the truth in love, and I'll tell it again. But I've seen this done in ways that the same truth was communicated in a loving way, and that same truth is communicated in a very unloving way that had radically different effects on an individual. And so I think that's a big point that we have to see here. And Matthew J., I just saw that question come in. Thanks for sending it. I'll get to here in a second. I think that's the question is, I want to push back and say, yes, the loving thing is to give the truth. But we cannot just say that's the only loving thing that matters is giving the truth. And now I'm just going to tell you what's true and end of story. It's like, no, let's also give it in love. Point number 3, moral relativism at the level of personal identity is unstable and harmful. They write here, quote, though it appears loving and tolerant to simply affirm whatever identity someone adopts for himself, we must see the barrage of possible identities as what it is, destabilizing. They then go on to say, apart from the Bible, there is no limiting principle that prevents individuals from adopting absurd conclusions about their identities. However, Jesus calls all people, even those exhausted in the search for significance, to come to him for rest. Our identity is meant to be received from God, not constructed by human autonomy. Look, I wonder if all of you who are listening agrees with this statement, that to search out whatever identity someone adopts for himself, we must see the barrage of possible identities is what is truly destabilizing. I know that in my research on transgenderism, I saw this, that when people are constantly barraged and identity is not anything grounded in reality, but is you have to figure it out and then live it out. But then there's all these social pressures that is extremely destabilizing. And I have quotes, and maybe I'll share this next week when I talk on transgenderism specifically, of people saying, well, I wore dresses, but then I like doing this and I like doing that, but I like having baseball hats and I like doing this. Like, what am I? Because our identity in our society is so grounded by gender stereotypes. I spoke on gender identity at a conference almost about 2 years ago now, I think. And afterwards, a high school girl came up to me, just distraught. And she says, look, I grew up with all brothers, and I love just wearing shorts and a t-shirt and a baseball hat. And I like going outside and playing in the whatever and doing what the guys do. And I was totally fine with that. And I was comfortable being a girl. And that's what I like doing as a girl. When she got to high school, then she says all of a sudden the pressure started. Everyone started saying, you're a guy, you're a boy, you do boy things. This, you don't fit that. You are gender nonconforming and all this sort of stuff. And she goes, I hated it. I did not want to be seen as a guy. I didn't want to be considered as a guy because this is how I dress and this is what I liked. So then she goes, I tried to not do that. And I tried to be super girly and I started wearing crop top shirts and tight jeans and makeup. And then she goes, and then I hated myself. And she goes, what am I supposed to do? And I think that the point here is that, yes, that when there's this barrage of identities and social pressures on how you're supposed to live and act that is functioning this way, that it's all based on these rigid gender stereotypes. And that, I think, is incredibly destabilizing and destructive. So my response to her was, look, this is easy for me to say. It's harder to do. But the problem is not you. The problem is our approach that we have constructed these pink and blue boxes of how boys and girls are supposed to be and how supposed to act. And then that then determines, and that is what is used to judge individuals. Again, I had a middle school girl come up to me and says she identified as a boy. Why? I asked her. Because she liked playing in the mud and chopping down trees. I said, why can't girls like playing in the mud and chopping down trees? See, I think there's a beauty to a biblical identity that says, yes, your identity is grounded. You can't just make it whatever you want, but is not just based on these socially constructed stereotypes that we recognize are also like sexist. To say like women are emotional and men are tough and women stay at home and men go to work. Like these were previously known as sexist gender stereotypes have now become the foundation for understanding our identity and gender within queer theory, within our modern gender framework and identity framework. And in reality, we can say, no, you can be grounded in your understanding of how God created you as a man, and you can be a more sensitive man and a more tough man. You can be a more tough girl and you can be a more sensitive girl, but there's a stable foundation of how God has created each person. And then there is a wide variation of what that can look like. But there's that stable foundation that then, as we talked about at the beginning, that then can look very differently as it plays out. And I think it is destabilizing because, I mean, the fundamental question is like, how do we identify, again, this is probably more of the topic next week, or next month with transgenderism, but like, what is a man? If it's not based in biology, what is a woman? If it's not based on biology, then what is it? How do we understand what it means what is a man? What is a woman? Often it comes back to socially constructed gender stereotypes that then I've seen wreak a lot of havoc on young people as they're trying to understand their identity within that framework. It is destabilizing because we also don't want to say, well, a girl just likes pink and a boy likes blue and a girl does this and a boy does this. But then the question is, okay, then how do we understand identity? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? Whatever you want, because if it's not biology, if it's not created by God and given, if it's not gender stereotypes, then what is it? And ultimately it becomes, as it says here, endless. It can be anything. And I don't think that provides the stability that our society needs. 2 more points here. Number 4, the Bible provides a consistent and impartial standard for judging which identities are sinful and which one are morally good. They say here that Christians, while they are often accused of being hateful, hypocritical, and having arbitrary standards, actually it's Christians that actually says, but the Christians who are hateful, hypocritical, and arbitrary, it's a failure of that individual Christian and not of biblical Christianity itself. Here's their point, and I fully agree with this, and I think this is a really good point. They said that everyone, including people who are defending expressive individualism, are going to draw a moral line somewhere on what is and is not a proper identity. And the question then becomes, why did you draw the line where you drew it, and what reasons do you have? And again, we can go into this a lot more later, but I've already kind of gone over my time that I wanted to do. So if you want to talk about it or put a Q in and tell me to explain more, or join the show and as a guest and chat with me about it. But again, the simple examples that I often use for this is to say, look, if there's an objective standard of what it means to be a student, then we make sense of what a student discount is and what's not. And therefore, if I walk into a restaurant and I say, I want a student discount, it's like, well, no, because you're not a student. Actually, I guess I am right now. Or I just got a teacher discount and I had to prove that I was a teacher. And so I got a free burrito at Chipotle, hey-o, for Teacher Appreciation Week. But I had to prove that I was a teacher. There's a clear understanding of what is a teacher, what's not, and they can then judge and discriminate against non-teachers versus teachers based on that clear standard. And we normally don't have a problem with this. Military discounts function the same way. Going to Costco, are you a member or not a member? There's a clear standard. But if we're going to say, well, everyone can have a student discount, everyone gets the senior citizen discount, and then I walk up and I go, I want a senior citizen discount. And they go, well, no, not you. What reason can they give that would be a good, justifiable reason? If they say senior citizen discounts for everybody, and I walk up and said, I want my senior citizen discount. Well, not you. Why not? Well, because you have a beard. We don't like beards. Or whatever reason they give me, I think would be an unjust discrimination because they said they're for everybody. And so if we're going to say expressive individualism, you can be whoever you want to be, just follow your own desires, do what you want to do, well, except for this person. And then we draw a line, any line is going to be unjust because I thought we could be whatever we want to be, but not that. Well, why not? So here's the question is everyone is going to draw a line on what is a good versus bad identity. The question is, why is that line drawn there? And is it ultimately preference, an opinion of that individual, and therefore they're trying to force their opinion on everybody? Is it a social construction? And that's what our society has determined as being where the line needs to be. And therefore it's the majority using their power to force the minority to agree with them. Or is there an actual transcendent objective standard for identity that we can appeal to, just like a definition for military or senior citizen or student or teacher, whatever, that we can say, no, the line is here and here's how we define it. And here's the reason, here's the objective definition or whatever. And that's how we're discriminating. And that's how we're judging. And so the point here in the book is to say, look, the Bible actually provides an impartial standard for judging which identities are sinful and which ones are not. There's a clear line in Scripture. Not that Christians always apply it well, but the Scripture does give it that we can then judge and not be unjust or kind of this hateful discrimination, which is, I think, how other views go. Last point here, there are other identity giving forces in our lives, but none as important as God. So your identity does get shaped by other things. And our identities can be guided by other things. I'm a teacher. Well, is that all I am? Is just a teacher? I'm a husband. I'm a father. There's other things that can shape and guide our identities. I'm a public speaker because I like doing that. But is that all within a framework of a greater identity of how I was created to be, which is to know God and make him known? And so, yes, there's ways in which I can choose and I can go and I can work on identity and I can grow in different ways and I can practice the things that I like doing, but all within this fundamental framework that I think provides some stability. So to finish, here's what they would say are some basic biblical, theological, and philosophical truths that every Christian parent should know. And I'll finish with this. Number one, the image of God is the foundation for human identity. Number two, the search for identity, while problematic when taken to the extreme, must be seen as a God-given impulse meant for us to find our identity ultimately in him. Number three, apart from Scripture, humanity will search in vain for identities that will satisfy. Point number four, one of the assumptions of Scripture is that the identity given to us by God as image bearers is meant to address fundamental questions of human existence. Where did we come from? Who are we? What is our purpose? What is truth? Scripture grounds these answers to questions theocentrically, God at the center, not anthropocentrically, with humans at the center. Next, at the heart of questions around identity are questions of where we place our foundation for trust and authority. Next one, human beings cannot bear the weight of endlessly wrestling and searching after their identities apart from God. Two more, modern fixation with identity cannot provide a definitive foundation for who we are. And lastly, modern ideas around identity do not have a consistent limiting principles. So there's at least their biblical foundations and what they think is important for us to know with some commentary from me on that. And so for the rest of the show, I have about an hour or so left. I will take your calls. I will address your questions. So again, put a Q in the live chat if you have a specific question for me, or click the link that I pinned at the top, and you can join the call as a guest. So I think the next question that came in for me was from Matthew. Matthew asks, isn't American individualism a good thing, which is different from expressive individualism? As long as one has a well-formed conscience, individualism isn't so bad, is it? Yes, I would agree that we are all unique individuals. Absolutely. And I think that when we are unique individuals and we live out the unique way in which each of us was created to be, I think that's truly beautiful. And we see that in scripture where Paul writes, I think in 1 Corinthians, where it's like, if everyone was an ear, where would the sense of smell be? If everyone was a nose, where would the sense of taste be? And it talks about all of us as part of the body of Christ, that God has gifted us and made each of us uniquely for a reason. And that when the whole body comes together, each of its parts being different, but together, then there's true beauty and flourishing there. And so I think that is true in society, that yes, I am a unique individual. God has created me for a very specific reason. And so that is a beauty, is when we recognize who God has made us, how he has made us to be, and how I can actually be a unique contribution to the world and to society. I think that is very different from, as we're talking about here, this expressive individualism that is not grounded in God, that I am whatever I want to be, however I want to be it, completely distinct, and I have to determine that myself. And so I would agree that we are unique individuals. But is there that same foundational grounding principle being created by God? All right, continuing on in the live chat. And again, there's nobody in the queue for callers. If you want to call in and I can chat with you. I hear this a lot. A friend of mine's wife said she was so glad she grew up 30 years ago because she was a tomboy who today would be told that she is trans. I've heard this many times from a lot of different people, that the category of tomboy doesn't almost exist anymore, that you are gender nonconforming, at least, you're gender confused, you have different gender expressions, again, because we're basing off these rigid gender stereotypes of here's how guys and girls are supposed to be. I did a video a long time ago, way back, probably 5 or 6 years ago, where people made the argument that there are transgender individuals in the Bible, and they pointed to Jacob as being one. They said, unlike his brother Esau was hairy, Jacob was smooth, Esau hunted, Jacob cooked. And like, see, Jacob was transgender. And it's like, wow. So you know nothing about his identity. He's not being able to identify himself. Jacob never came out and said, use she, her pronouns for me. He never considered himself to be a woman. We have no indication of that whatsoever. But because Jacob was not hairy, stayed at home and cooked and was closer to his mom, individuals are arguing that Jacob was transgender. Is that freeing? Is that freeing to say, here, it's like you get to determine your own identity, but you actually also don't, because if you're more gender stereotypical female, then therefore you are transgender, whether you identify as trans or not. And we see this on other examples. And so that, you can, if you want to go to my YouTube channel, and I'll try to make it pop up over here if I remember after it gets done processing, but it was like transgenders in the Bible, part 1 and part 2. And that's what I see. And so I think that, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of parents as well saying, man, I'm so glad that I didn't grow up in this way, because there's extreme pressure on our kids that they have to be in a certain way. Again, I remember standing in line I was speaking at a summer camp, and these girls were in line. These girls in front of me were in line for the zip line, and they were chatting. And I remember hearing one of the girls, they're all talking about who they liked and didn't like. And one of the girls really sheepishly, really reserved, goes, well, kind of head down. She's just like, I'm only attracted to girls. Sorry, I'm only attracted to boys. And the other girls in the group were like, it's okay. Like, she had this extreme, like, oh my goodness, how horrible of me. I have to be like repentant or sorry and apologize for this fact that I only like boys, that I'm just straight. And the other girls that came, oh, it's okay that you're just straight. Oh, that's okay. Because the extreme pressure that she was feeling to have an identity that was other than simply just heterosexual. And so I think this is these are some of the pressures that I hope, no matter who you are listening, that if these are the pressures that young people are facing, that we recognize, okay, there's a problem here. They should not feel bad for being straight. They should not feel apologetic, have to be apologetic for being straight. We should not have girls feeling like, oh, I have to be a boy because I like chopping down trees and playing in the mud, or I have to be a boy because I like wearing baseball caps, shorts, and a t-shirt. That we can actually have see a beauty of how we can live and be different within a certain framework. And so hopefully most of us can get behind this idea of people who are being forced into something, based on rigid gender stereotypes, right? Rather than grounded in reality, as being a problem, because we recognize these stereotypes as they were previously seen to be sexist stereotypes. So, all right. Question here from Sergio, tagged me in it. Thanks, Sergio. I don't think I've seen you here before, Sergio, so thanks for showing up. Sergio Mendez asked me, are you sure the Bible, where God is seen condoning genocide and slavery, has an objective standard for morality? Yes. I've talked about these topics a lot on the show before. Let me just start this. If there is no God, then can we actually argue that genocide and slavery is wrong? That would be my question back to you. And again, all people, I'm not going to assume that you're an atheist, but all people are going to answer that question differently. But I've had a lot of atheists here on the show that have been said, like, no, it's just based on whatever culture decides. And so if the culture decided, slavery was good when it was legal, now it's bad. Now we just see it as bad, but it was good at some point in time. And so I think that a lot of people would argue that. And I've heard that argument a lot. So the question then is, if that's our view, then why is what God commanded back then a problem? And, but if you're going to say that no, genocide and slavery are objectively wrong, then there is an objective standard. And I would be curious on where you got that standard from. And so my understanding or my defense that I've made many, many times on the show here before, is that, let me just put it this way. And again, if you want to call in, Sergio, I'd love to chat with you on the line. If you have further questions you want to ask, go ahead and do that as well. I would not say it's genocide. I would call it judgment. He is not simply wiping people out because of their ethnicity. Right, we see in Scripture over and over and over again that God gave them chances to repent and to turn to Him and to make better choices, and be based on the things that they were doing. This was an act of judgment that God used the Israelites to judge other nations. And guess what? When the Israelites acted in a similar way, God used other nations to judge the Israelites. This is a form of judgment, not just simply genocide. It's not wiping them out just because of their people group, but because of what they did. And there's a lot of other ways of looking at this, with the Canaanites, sacrificing children to Molech and practicing a lot of stuff that we would probably be on board with giving the death penalty for today if people did in today's culture. And so I think that there's a different way to look at this. With slavery, I'd be curious on exactly what verses you are referring to say that God is condoning slavery. I think that there's translation questions. I think there's other things to say, okay, when it talks about slavery in the Bible, what are we referring to? And are we imposing our understanding of chattel slavery in the 1800s in America onto the Bible? Or is the Bible's understanding, when it uses the word slave, what is it actually referring to? Really quickly, because there's differences between whether it's Israelite slaves versus non-Israelite slaves, and I've talked about all that on the show before. But again, I think what's often forgotten, I think it's in Exodus 21:19 or 21:16, where it's often overlooked, at least. Let me just pull it up here really quickly. 21:16, I believe. This is in a chapter of Exodus that a lot of people reference because it starts off, for example, let me just pull up the whole chapter. In Exodus 21, verse 2, if you buy a Hebrew servant, they serve you for 6 years, and then the seventh they shall go free. Where is, let's see. Verse 7, if a man sells his daughter as a servant. So that's what's interesting, is what translation is this? I just Google searched it here really quickly. What translation is this? The International Version. Okay, so they retranslated this as if anyone sells his daughter as a servant rather than sells his daughter as a slave. And I think that's a good thing to translate, because when it says if a man sells his daughter as a slave, then we often think chattel slavery and we think, oh my goodness, how horrible. But again, in that same chapter, if you go down to verse 16, it says, if anyone kidnaps someone, he is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is in the kidnapper's possession. I think the ESV has a slightly different way of putting that. Let me just pull that version up here really quickly. The ESV verse 16 says, whoever steals a man and sells him, or anyone found in possession of him, shall be put to death. And they still use the word slave when a man sells his daughter as a slave. So here's the question, is if in verse 16 it says, if you steal someone and sell him, or if you are found in possession of a stolen man, you should be put to death. That seems to be understanding the definition of slavery as we understand it from chattel slavery in the 1800s. Well, we went over to Africa, stole a bunch of people, kidnapped them, and then either sold them or were in possession of kidnapped people. And so I think Exodus 21:16 gives the death penalty for what we often understand to be slavery. And so then it would not be allowing that exact same type of slavery in verse 7, when it's like, oh yeah, you can sell your daughter as a slave, when it literally says if you sell someone as a slave in that kidnapping sense, then you should be put to death. And so I would like to have a further conversation if you want to join the show, because I think that the passages that are frequently cited that try to show that the Bible or that God is condoning genocide and slavery as good, I think are misunderstood. Now, again, you probably say that I'm taking things out of context, or I'm just changing it to try to fit my own narrative. And that's the question we have to come back to and ask is, am I changing it to fit my narrative, or is the skeptic changing it to fit their narrative? Someone's got it right and someone's got it wrong. The question is who has better reason for their conclusion that they've come to. Mirza asked this question: being a student is a matter of convention and not a physical reality. Why not treat gender the same way? Well, I would argue that gender is not just a convention, that we are created male and female. This is built into our biology. It's built into our genetics. It's built into the process of procreation. We have half a reproductive system, and you join with the other half to actually have children. And so this is not a convention like student, but this has a biological grounding in reality, where bodies produce one of two different types of gametes. You produce sperm or egg. And a lot of studies have shown, and I've read a lot of authors who are looking at this and saying that, look, there's never been a person that we have found whose body can produce both sperm and egg. Our bodies do have a true dichotomy of either sperm or egg, or our reproductive system is broken and we produce neither. There is not an intermediate gamete between sperm and egg, and there's not a body that produces both sperm and egg. Our body is oriented toward producing one or the other, or it's broken and it produces neither. And so I think that this biological reality is a grounding of our understanding of gender that then means that it's not simply just a convention. The question then is because I mentioned the fact of student, this is how we judge in society. So if we can create an understanding in our society of what is a student and what is not, and then have an objective way of saying student discount, not a student discount, without having this unjust discrimination, then couldn't we do the same when it comes to gender, when it is something that I think is grounded in reality? So, I found this to be interesting as well, is even the Unity pastor that came and spoke to our group. He talked about how he is extremely liberal, he said, in all of his politics. And then he found out that people were even really mad at him because he wouldn't agree that gender was a complete social construct. He believed that there was male energy and female energy as part of this kind of pantheistic world that he believed in. And so because he rejected this modern gender paradigm, that gender is just a social convention, that even he wasn't liberal enough for some of those communities that he was in. And so I think that you don't have to just simply be a Christian to recognize that that gender is not socially constructed or a modern convention. Now, I think with this, it does depend, or we have to ask the question of what do we mean by gender? because it's like, well, because, boys wear, shorts and girls wear dresses. Well, that is a social convention, right? Gender norms are often socially constructed, right? Who can do what, or how should you act, and what colors, boys like blue and girls like pink. We recognize absolutely those are social conventions. And we've had these sort of ideas on where you can live, or what you can do and what you can do for a job, and these sort of things that are socially constructed. And you go to a different society and they do things differently. And so that absolutely does exist. The question is everything socially constructed? Is all realities of gender socially constructed? And I would argue no. That in a biblical view that we are created male or female. Genesis 1:27, God made male and female in his image. This is not just God made people in his image. This is not just God made humans in his image. That before there was ever any society, that before there was ever any government, before there were any laws, God created male and female. And then the very next verse, Genesis 1:28, what is the purpose of creating male or female? He said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. That God created men and women different for the purpose of procreation. And that is where then we see, and I agree with, it's Deborah So is a non-Christian PhD neuroscientist. Forget exactly. But she argues, it's not, our gender is not based on biology because there's intersex, and it's not based on genetics because there's genetic abnormalities, but she would argue that it's based on gametes, sperm and egg. And there's no dichotomy there. And based on what you have, your body is different. And so boys grow up to be men and potentially fathers. Girls grow up to be women and potentially mothers. And there are gender norms that then flow from mothers and fathers on how you relate and what do you do and your role. And so I don't think it is purely a social convention. That's a good question though, Mears. I appreciate that. All right, I'm gonna keep walking through the list. Again, the lines are open if someone wants to call in and chat. All right, Mirza again. Mirza, good to see you here. Bio professor, good to see you here as well. And HMFOG. All right, so a lot of people here chatting. Love to see it. Mirza asks, what is an image of God that we are made to? So again, there's different views on this. Exactly what does it mean to be made in the image of God? And I think I kind of take personally all the views in a sense kind of put together. I think the image of God in us is not that we look like God, because God doesn't have a look, right? Scripture is clear that God is spirit, and God does not have a body. God does not have a look. He is not a man or a woman in the sense he has a biological body that looks like a man or a woman. That's why both men and women are created in his image. Instead, the image of God, I think, has a spiritual component, that we are spiritual beings, as we see with the physical world, and even animals do not have that spiritual component. I think it's part of our relational aspect. I think it is part of our ability to relate to God. I think it is partly our intellect and how God has created us to think and to be. I think there's an aspect of what he has created us to do, that we are sub-creators under God, that he created us to then create, and we can innovate, and we can really kind of put that into practice and to really do incredible things. John Lennox talks about this idea of, like beavers can make beaver dams really well, and bees can make beehives really well. But a bee can never learn to make a beaver dam, and a beaver can never learn to make a beehive. But humans, watching both, can learn to do both. But then we can also innovate and make improvements upon both, to where you can say, well, the beaver dam is pretty good, and that's a great design. But actually, if we designed it like this, and with these materials, we can make it even stronger. And so we have this ability to create and to innovate. And I think that's part of the image of God in us, is not just simply smart, but how much farther we can go with these sort of features. And so there's a lot of people who want to say, the relational components of us, or our mental abilities, or our spiritual abilities, or our role as being, having dominion over the earth. But the ultimate, I think, point for this conversation is that God created humans uniquely, and as the pinnacle of his creation, as the final things of his creation. And because he made us, we actually have a teleos. We have that purpose, we have that design, and now we have that dignity, that he made us valuable. And therefore my value does not come in what I can do or what I can accomplish or how useful I am to society, but my value is simply because I'm a human being made in the image of God. And therefore now I have rights and I have dignity and I have a way in which you ought to treat me. There's a moral obligations involved there. So I think it is a deep and widespread, has widespread implications for how we live and act being a created human by God versus evolved. So not sure what else to say there. All right, Mirza again. And I see more questions coming in again. If you have a question, put a Q or join the call live. Subjective judgment doesn't mean not important. I don't like slavery. I recognize someone could disagree. I don't care. I follow my morality. I would agree with you that subjective judgment doesn't mean not important. You clearly see this as important. The question is if all we have is subjective judgment and all we have is your morality. You follow your morality, that's good, but who are you to force your morality on someone else? So Mirza, what if someone comes up to you and says, well, my morality is to own slaves. And so therefore I'm going to go buy and own a slave. It is now your opinion versus their opinion. Now you say, well, this is important because we're talking about a slave here. We're talking about someone now being owned as property. That's an important conversation. The question is, how do you adjudicate between those two views? Who's to say you're right and they're wrong? And if you can say, well, neither is right or wrong, all we have is my morality and I'm going to follow my morality, then the question is, are you going to do anything to stop them? And if you get a bunch of people on your side to then stop them, isn't that the very understanding of oppression where the majority is forcing a minority view or a weaker view to live and act like them? Or can you actually say, no, there is an objective way in which we are supposed to treat people. People are valuable. People are not property. And therefore you're wrong, not just because it's my morality or my opinion, but because this is how you're not supposed to treat people. And I think this is, it's not that if I can say this too, Mirza, for those just joining for the first time, Mirza and I, we go back a long ways. He calls in almost every week or every other week and posts a lot of questions, and I appreciate it. Is the worst that we can say about slavery is just, I don't like it? Like, I don't like chocolate. Cool, Ryan. Is it just, I just don't like slavery? And someone goes, cool, well, I do like it. That's really weak. If when it comes to something like slavery and I don't know what you would say, Mirza, to this, is the worst that you can say is I don't like slavery? Or can you actually say slavery is wrong? Slavery is wrong and people should not own slaves. And if they do, they are wrong and they should be punished. And that's not just my opinion and my morality. That is a fact of reality. Like, can you say something that strong? Or is it just, I just don't like it? And someone could disagree and they do like it. You say, oh, I don't care. I follow my morality. Well, you would care if you start getting owned as a slave. Like when this gets applied to us, then all of a sudden we do start caring. And I think that's the problem with a secular framework is it does not allow us to actually make strong claims about things that are truly wrong. Man, it's not just my morality. That's what I would say. So yes, I would agree with you that you can think something is important, but it's ultimately your opinion, and therefore, how dare you force your opinion on someone else? I mean, that's what Christians are constantly being accused of doing. How dare you, Christian, think that you can just force your morality on others? You can't do that. Let us live how we want to live. Okay. Can we actually do that consistently? Can we truly just let people live however they want to live? No, because everyone is going to draw a line somewhere. Everyone draws a line somewhere. Everyone is going to stop someone from doing something. The question is, why do we draw the line where we draw it? Do you have any good actual reasons for it other than, well, that's just where I draw my line. And I'm going to get a bunch of people who all agree with me to force that upon you. Or can we actually appeal to something transcendent? Mirza comments, so I'm going to jump to the bottom here really quickly. There was literally a war to end slavery in the U.S. The right and wrong are not validations we get from above, but something we all figure out for ourselves. So yes, you're right. There was a war fought over this. But is the only reason that we think slavery, the only reason we don't practice slavery is because the North won? What if the South had won? What if the South had won and slavery was still being practiced today? Then we say slavery was good or is good because it's legal? Is the only reason the Holocaust is looked down upon is because Germany lost? What if Germany had won? Like yes, we fought a war to end it. But again, if that's all we have, this is my big thing about on a secular view of morality. If that's all we have, then that is literally the definition of the more powerful force, the North, who just so happened to win the war, forcing those that they beat into submission based on their opinion. It's only the North's view, slavery is bad, and the South's view, slavery is good. Well, the North won, therefore they're going to force the South to agree. How is that not just inherently the definition of oppression, where we use our power to force those that we defeat or the minority into submission to agree with us, rather than saying, like, that's the worst that we can say is, yep, there was a war. The North won. There was no right and wrong. North won, and that's why we don't have slavery anymore. Well, if you're going to argue that our society is better now than it was, then you're assuming some sort of objective definition to say, why is it better to not have slavery than to have slavery? Where are we getting that idea? Like, I get that this is, Mirza, this is what you're saying, and this is your view. Man, it's a view that makes me, I don't know, sad. It makes me, is this really the most we can say? Mirza says, if the South had won, then there would be slavery. Isn't that what we have now? It's an observed reality. That's the whole point. Yes, if the South had won, there would be slavery. So is that wrong? You're describing what would be the case, but again, we don't get an ought from an is. We do not get objective moral obligations from simply what is. So you would say, yes, it's right. If the South won, there would be slavery. So is that wrong? Is that a worse society? Saying it's a worse society, or that is wrong, or this is destructive, or whatever, is assuming an objective standard. And so the question is, I'm asking you, Mirza, if the South had won, and if there was slavery, would you actually say this is actually wrong? Or just, I don't like it, but that's the world I live in, and so that we just got to kind of put up with it. So Mirza, why don't you call in? I keep just responding to all your questions. You say, well, better for whom? You have a strong emotional reaction, but that is your reaction and some objective value. Better for whom? Better for human beings created in the image of God. This is not just a strong emotional reaction, but here's, I think, such an important point, is that if there is no God and secularism is true, then all that I am doing right now is just is strongly reacting emotionally. This is only a strong emotional reaction, rather than I have a strong emotional reaction because of a true aspect of reality. That when I see a dad punching his baby in the face, I have a strong reaction. Why? Because that's actually wrong and is evil, and therefore it's going to make me react that way. And so the question is am I just simply, is this only my emotional reaction, and that slavery is not actually evil, and my reaction is just my opinion that I don't like slavery? Like, I eat chocolate and I go, oh, gross. Is that all I'm doing right now? Or is there actually a thing to say slavery, it is wrong, and therefore we have an appropriate reaction? Like is there, and here, as I see you called, I'm gonna get here in a second. The question is there actually like happy things that can make us happy and sad things that make us sad? Or is there nothing grounded in reality, and our happiness and sadness is only just subjective in how we respond? And I would say, no, there are sad things that should make us sad. So if someone dying makes you happy, that's weird. If truly joyous things make you sad, that's weird, because we should have appropriate reactions to things that exist in reality. So Mirza, it has been far too long since I've had time to chat with you, and so I appreciate the pushback and your questions. Let me take you out of the green room. Mirza?
Hey, hi, how you doing? I missed you, man.
I missed you too. Thanks for calling in, and it's been a while.
Every time you miss a week or two, I'm afraid you're deconstructed and I won't have anyone to argue with. So glad to see you hanging in there.
Well, hopefully, I hope that our conversations are more than just simply someone to argue with, but hopefully it is a thoughtful approach to consider other perspectives, and if our arguments are left wanting to actually change, not just to have this continual argument.
Inquiry, right?
Yeah, so hopefully it's not just a continual argument, but hopefully we're getting somewhere. So anyways, awesome. All right, so you're posting a ton. I'm trying to respond. How do you want to start?
So I once had a problem with theory of relativity. right? Which says that there's no one frame of reference. Everybody has their own frame of reference, and that didn't make any sense. Is like isn't there like one space and we are moving through it? The point is, if you cannot define what that is, then it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? Same thing with morality. Like you say, okay, slavery is wrong. Is eating chickens wrong? Like, the PETA guy would say, yes, it's totally wrong. Now he feels strongly about animal rights, and you think that maybe chicken nuggets are delicious. I don't know. Right. Same thing with slavery. Yeah, we are glad slavery won. Those are our values. And in fact, had Confederacy won, maybe we would be pro-slavery now. Who knows? And we would be just as convinced now, in that case, as we are now, that the way things are right.
Okay, so is your view then that there is no actual right and wrong? That would you say you can't actually say slavery is wrong? It is just your opinion that you don't like it, or you personally think it's wrong, but you can't say that it's actually objectively
my value.
Wrong.
It's my value. Slavery is wrong. That's my value.
But your value is subjective to you, and someone else can have a value that slavery is good, and their value is just as right as yours.
It's not right. There's no right. It's a different value. It's you keep thinking there's like some universal frame of reference. That I'm telling you, it depends on the values, on how you've been brought up. That's just observed reality. If there was some sort of universal slavery is wrong, then there would have been no slavery. There would have been no civil war. There would have been no. Obviously, people felt strongly for slavery. They thought it was moral. They fought for it, and they lost. And had they won, who knows? Society might be different. But there is no universal frame of reference for morality.
Okay, so you argue that if there is a universal frame of reference, if slavery was actually wrong, there would never have been slavery. Would you apply that same logic to other things? Like if murder was wrong, there would be no murder. So therefore, since there is murder, since people do murder, so murder is not actually wrong?
So first of all, what is murder?
The unjustified. Hold on. Okay, so let me define it really quickly. So the unjustified killing of innocent human beings. So a 10-year-old. So let's just say a gunman goes into a school.
It was justified because it was judgment, right?
Right. So there's justified, right? I believe in self-defense. I believe in killing in war is not always being unjustified. So let's just use a common example in America. A gunman walks into a school and shoots and kills 10 children in a school.
Right.
Let's just use that definition of murder. Is that wrong?
Yes, according to my values and yours, it's wrong. But according to my values, the conquest of Canaanite was wrong, and according to your values, it's right.
Okay, hold on a second. Hold on. Let's just see if we can have some common ground here. Okay, so you say it's wrong. Now, but you argued a second ago that if something is actually wrong, then it wouldn't happen. You said if slavery was wrong, there would be no slavery.
If something was objectively wrong, like that everybody could see it as obviously wrong.
Okay, so you don't think that school shootings are objectively wrong?
Where is the objective wrong? What are you comparing them to?
Well, I'm asking you. So you're saying that a man walking into a school and shooting it up is not objectively wrong. It's just a difference of values. He values what he does. You value what you do. It's a different opinion, but what he's doing is not actually objectively wrong.
Objective is something you can point outside of yourself.
Correct.
There's actual defined measurement, right? But you cannot say this is objectively wrong if you cannot point to something outside of yourself.
Okay, and so you don't think that with a school shooting you can point to anything outside of myself?
I'm sorry, I missed you for a second. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so when it comes to, let's say, a school shooting, you would say, is there something that we can point to that's outside of ourselves that we can say a school shooting is actually wrong?
Yes.
And what would that be?
Objectively wrong, not actually wrong. Exactly. Nothing. You feel it's wrong, you don't like it, but it's all you. It's all in your mind. Right? If
Okay.
let's say,
Hold on.
let's say instead of 10,
Mirza, hold on a second.
instead of 10 students get shot, let's say they get crushed by a boulder. Boulder rolls down the mountain, crushes 10 students. Is that morally wrong? No, right? Because it just happened, right? So same thing here. It's you're giving me your feelings and your impressions, and they feel real to you because they're strong, but they're inside you. There's nothing outside you.
So I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on what you're saying, because I think this is a fundamentally big difference in views. Is that in your view, what it sounds like you're saying is that there is nothing outside of me that I can point to show that this is objectively wrong, and therefore school shootings, a gunman walking into a school and shooting 10 children is on the same level as a rock rolling down a hill and crushing 10 students. So there's no objective moral wrong that was done. It's just an accident of nature. Is that your view?
There is moral wrong. There is moral wrong. There is no objective moral wrong. It's right. It's a.
So why then punish a gunman as if he has done something objectively wrong when he has not?
Because I think it's wrong.
So you're forcing your opinion upon him.
Pretty much.
Okay. So that I think you've laid it out clearly. And I think that's the whole thing I'm trying to lay out. The distinction of views here really quickly is in a secular view, there's nothing outside of us that we can point to. And therefore you cannot say walking into school and shooting up a bunch of kids is wrong. You can't say that's objective. It's objectively wrong. Sorry, I took off the word objective. That it's objectively wrong.
I can say it's wrong subjectively based on my values, which I want to enforce. Right? If you did see a bunch of slavers, wouldn't you try to end slavery?
And so, well, it's not just that I would want to. The question is, do I actually have a right to? And is there an objective framework and a preference, or is there an objective vantage point that allows for me to do that without me being oppressive by forcing my opinion on other people?
Let me ask you this. What can you observe? Let's say you are right and I'm... How would the world be different if there was objective reality versus subjective reality?
Well, we've had this conversation before, and I'm not necessarily arguing that the world would be different. The point is this, is that the world is what objective morality allows us to do is we can actually make moral judgments upon actions and deem them as right or wrong. And then we can actually have true justice where we punish those who've done wrong and we protect those who have done right, without any sort of objective morality. Well, no, you're oppressing them. You're forcing your opinion upon them, not actually enacting true justice. And so I think that's a fundamental difference. And I think, and this is why, in short, in a Christian view, God would be that objective external reference point that we point to. And we say, God is good. God is love. He has called us and commanded us to love, that human beings are valuable, inherently valuable, because they're created in the image of God. And therefore, for a gunman to walk into a school and to shoot and kill innocent human beings is actually wrong, because he has destroyed something of value and he has gone against what God has commanded him to do, which he has commanded him to love and not to kill. And therefore, what he has done is wrong. And so that is why I can say objectively, there is a moral right and wrong. And then we're going to judge people and hold people accountable to that. And that's why in a secular view, there's not. And that is why I would just say there is there's incredible bankruptcy in a secular morality. I think hold on a second. I think a moral framework that is not able to say that school shootings are wrong objectively, I think that's a morally bankrupt system.
Subjectively wrong. They're subjectively wrong. It's wrong to, I don't like it, I hate it, these are my values, you can agree with them, you cannot agree with them. It won't matter, if you want to shoot the school and my kids are, I'll kill you first. It doesn't, like, when it comes to death and life and those sort of things, some things are not like left for agreement. You know what I mean? If somebody wants to go kill people, knowing that I could be killed, I want to kill him. You know, understand? It doesn't matter if he's objectively right or wrong. Same thing with conquest of Canaan. I mean, like, your book says God gave you this land. I don't care. I don't want you to kill my kids. It doesn't. You cannot argue with death. You cannot argue with protecting my family. And it doesn't matter if it's objectively right or subjectively right or wrong or whatever other person thinks. When it comes to things like life and death, you do what you have to do, right? It's morally wrong. I think it is wrong, right? But let me ask you this: what Israel is doing in Gaza, is that objectively wrong?
Look, let me put it this way.
No. Is it yes or no?
I'll say I don't know. I don't know all the details.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
Really?
Hold on.
They're killing civilians? Exactly.
Hold on.
You're arguing for like 10 kids when they're like killing hundreds of thousands of people with bombs. The kids are being amputated and you're like waffling. I don't know if it's wrong or right. I mean, where is your objective reality now?
Let me put it this way. It is wrong to intentionally take the life of an innocent human being. Right. And so I think that, this is why I say I don't know. In war is difficult. Can we just say that?
They're starving people.
Can you just say for example?
They're starving people.
Mirza, hold on a second. You're arguing here. Let me just ask this. The way in which you're responding is as if I am morally bankrupt by my answer to say the details of why people are dying matters.
They're starving people.
Is it wrong?
Look, they're dropping bombs on what are these refugee camps. They drop 2,000-pound bomb on tents. The kids' legs are being amputated without anesthesia because they won't allow any medical supplies to come in. How can you say exactly right? If you were a slaver, you'd probably be it depends. We are helping African people develop.
Okay, hold on.
You're gonna have 1,000 excuses, just like you do now.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm muting you. Hold on a second. So let me ask you this, because going back to our first part of this conversation, is it wrong to start? Is it actually objectively wrong to starve people? Is it objectively wrong to drop bombs on children? What do you say?
Yes.
No, you just said there's no objective wrong. So it's only
wrong. It's definitely wrong. No. But you say it's not wrong.
Hold on. Is it your opinion that we should not drop bombs on children? Or is it objectively wrong that we should not drop bombs on children?
It is my opinion and very strong values.
Okay. So really this conversation that you're having with me, here's what I'm trying to point out here for a second. The way in which we respond, I think, is a visceral reaction that reveals that we actually think that you think that I am morally bankrupt. If I were to say, everything that Israel is doing in Gaza right now is completely right and justified and good. This is not just an opinion-based argument like I like chocolate and you don't, or I like vanilla ice cream and you don't. The way in which you are responding to me, and actually this whole conversation, I think, indicates that this is a much deeper than simply just a conversation on conflicting opinions, as if I am actually objectively, morally bankrupt for believing that, if that's what I believed.
I'm not saying you're objectively morally bankrupt. I am saying if there was objective morality, then this would be it. You would be having no problems with saying, the genocide is bad, what they're doing now bad. You wouldn't be like, well, it depends, maybe this, maybe that. That's the same. That's like waffling that slave owners use. They have their excuses too.
Let me ask you this question.
Pure moral question, right?
So let me just ask this question. Here's why I just said I don't know. Because I would say that there are things that I've seen Israel that's done that I think is wrong. And I think things Israel has done that I don't think are wrong. Hold on, Mirza, just a second. Because here's the whole point, is that I don't think that all killing is unjustified. For example, I believe in Mirza, give me a second here. I know you always call in and you say you like to argue, but sometimes it feels like it's only an argument and you're just going to argue against whatever I say, no matter what I say, versus allowing us to find a little bit of common ground. So let me put it this way. If I walk into a person's house for no other reason than just pure joy and I shoot them, is that the same as someone who is coming into my house with a gun threatening my family and I shoot them? Are those different scenarios? One is self-defense and one is not. Do you see a difference between self-defense?
Yes. So dropping bombs on refugee camps is self-defense?
No, I'm not arguing that.
Is slavery wrong?
Mirza, can I please? I muted you. You can stop talking for a second. I want to stick to one thing for a second, because the moment we find any sort of common ground, you all of a sudden you just jump from one to the next to the next to the next. And I'm trying to at least find a common ground. So because I argue that there's a difference between murder, the unjustified intentional killing of an innocent human being, me walking into some random person's house just for the mere joy of it and shooting them and killing them, that is murder, that is wrong, versus someone coming into my house, threatening my family, attacking me, holding a gun to my head or something like that, and then I kill them. We recognize that as self-defense. I'm simply saying, can we agree that there's a difference between self-defense that's justified killing and which is unjustified killing, which would be murder? And if the answer is yes, we can agree on that. Then we have to look at a case-by-case scenario to figure out, is what's happening here self-defense? Is this justified or is it unjustified? So I would agree with, so just because I think that some things can be justified, by no means leads to the conclusion that I think that dropping bombs on children just for fun or whatever is now justified, just because there's some things that are or aren't. And that's why I said, look, in war, it is difficult, because in war, terrible things happen. And some of those things that happen in war are absolutely wrong. And other things that happen in war are justified. And so the question is everything that Israel has ever done in Gaza wrong? I don't think so. The question is everything that Israel's ever done in Gaza right? I don't think so. And so, yes, if they are simply just dropping bombs on children for no reason, then yes, that is wrong. And I agree with you there. But here's the fundamental question that we have to come back to, is in this sort of conversation, is there even a right and wrong that we're trying to argue over, or is it merely just my opinion versus your opinion? And so maybe we can talk about these details all the time. And this happens. I was in Colorado last week, and I was talking with a girl on the street in downtown Fort Collins who said, no, there's no right and wrong. Do whatever you want, believe whatever you want to believe, and just live out your own ideas. And then it turned out that she was actually going to volunteer at a domestic violence victim shelter. And so I asked her, I said, is the person who committed the domestic violence, is what they're doing wrong by harming women? And she went, because she didn't want to say yes, because that would contradict what she just said. And so that's the fundamental question that we're trying to ask. Is there an actual way that we can say, look, if you commit domestic violence, you're wrong and you should be punished because that is actually wrong? Now, her response back was, rather than something that seems a little bit more clear cut like that, or what example we want to use, she goes, well, is it wrong to steal bread if you are hungry and you're trying to feed your starving children? And I think sometimes what we do is we jump to very difficult cases that are debated, like, should we steal bread if you are starving? And we use that as if it's a way to ignore the clear-cut cases. And that's why sometimes I want to say, look, with the Israel-Gaza stuff, there's a lot of conflict on both sides. There's a lot of disagreement on both sides. And yes, there's right, and yes, there's wrong. And that is why we can debate and discuss what's happening over there, is because we're trying to hopefully figure out what is actually the right and wrong way to live and to act. It makes no sense to spend our time fighting like crazy, I think, if it's purely subjective. And so that, I think it's difficult. And that's why I'm using clear-cut cases. If you want to what if it's just dropping a bomb on children for the mere kicks and giggles, for the mere joy and pleasure? Is that wrong? And so, sorry, I muted you. I've said a lot because I think I'm trying to frame this conversation in a way that kind of makes sense for a lot of people. But any quick thoughts to what I just said right there? I'm trying to find some agreement so that we can actually have a discussion on specific scenarios. But if we can't even find any sort of agreement that there is a right and wrong or any sort of objective preference, then all it is our opinions, and who really cares what our opinions are?
Have you heard of people say someday everybody would have been against this, right? During slavery, there were people like you who justified it this way, that way. It was a conversation, and now everybody's against it. And you say, well, I mean, if you can always go, well, it's complicated, this issue, that issue, then there is no objective right and wrong. You can argue any point. You can argue for slavery. You can argue for school shootings. You can argue for anything that way. And that's really the perfect demonstration that there is no objective right and wrong. There is things we strongly feel about, but, when it comes to something that you support, I guess, you're not willing to say that starving people on purpose is objectively wrong.
So I didn't say that everything is complicated. I said there are some gray issues, but I said that there are clear issues that are not complicated. So that
How
wasn't
is
the
it
point
more
that I
clear
made.
than starving people? How is it more
Yes.
clear than Gaza? How is it more clear than
Did,
slavery?
did
How is it
I
more clear than genocide?
hold on? Did I say that starving people was good?
You didn't condemn it.
I don't think I had a chance. I mean, there's you laid out about 5 or so different objections, and I'm trying to walk through them. And so maybe I didn't say anything, but I didn't condone it. Yes, I think that intentionally starving innocent people is wrong.
So what Israel is doing in Gaza is wrong.
I don't know what Israel is doing as far as starving. All right, that does not
Really?
been something. Now, let me put it this way. Look, there are ways in which let me ask it this way, because I don't know exactly the reason of what is happening, and so I'm not going to act like I know, and I'm going to speak into it. Let me change the scenario slightly and ask you what you think about this. If there is a war that is, let's say, justified, and let's say let's say let's say the Allied forces, let's say we're talking about World War II and the Allies are coming in on Hitler, and he has trapped himself in this bunker. And let's say that we use starvation as a way to get him to come out of the bunker, because we're going to keep any food from going in there and we're going to force him to come out. Is that sort of starvation morally wrong? Or would you say there's a good justified reason for why we're starving them, because we're trying to get them to use their starvation to come out and to end this war in a way that doesn't mean we just go in there and bomb them and kill them? Like, would that sort of starvation be okay with you?
See what the problem with your issue is?
Yeah, what's the problem?
What if the world is in danger and you have to enslave 10 people and make them work on a farm? That's ridiculous, right? It's crazy. Slavery is clearly wrong. Starving people is wrong. You can come up with some edge example, but if you do not recognize that what Israel is doing is wrong, and you say, well, I didn't look at it. I mean, did you even try? This is as clear-cut issue as any. And if you cannot recognize this to be the case, then there's no objective morality.
Well, so here's
some days, right?
So here's, I think, that the point that you're trying to make is, if we can't figure something out, then it's not objective. Am I understanding you correctly? Because I'm not saying something, or because I don't know. Okay.
It's easy to figure out. It's easy to see, yet you don't accept it. All it takes is a Google search. I mean, seriously, how can you not see it?
But that's
just
the
whole point of Sunday. That's the whole point of Sunday. Everybody would have been against this. Everybody's now against slavery. Even people in the South. Back then, people are divided. Now everybody's against it.
Hold on. So Mirza, you're changing.
Someday everybody will be against this.
Mirza, you're changing what you mean in a second, because you're arguing that there is no objective morality, but now you say it's easy to see that it's wrong. Well, that's just your opinion. But then what you're saying, what's easy to see is your opinion.
It's as clear-cut as slavery or genocide or anything.
But that's only your opinion, because someone else can have a different opinion and theirs is equally justified.
So now you're saying there's no relative morality?
I don't know how you jumped to that conclusion.
Because it's just my opinion, right?
In your view, you are arguing everything that we've discussed in the last almost hour. You are arguing is just your opinion, right?
It's not opinion, it's my value.
Okay, well, change your word. It's your value, and someone else can have a different value.
Right.
So Israel's values. So Israel has a value. Is their value objectively wrong?
To start children.
And is that objectively wrong if that's their value?
It's wrong, not objectively, and they're going to do it anyways. Like.
So here's I think the moral. Let me ask this final question, because we only have about 8 minutes left, and I think this is a topic that me and you have not discussed. I don't know the best way to ask this question. I think, and then what I would say is that there is it's clear that there is right and wrong. And I think that we have to go against every fabric of our body to say that Israel is not actually wrong, or that things are not actually wrong objectively. And so here's my question is what is your, if I can put it this way, what would be your main argument for why why not? Let me just put it this way. Why not just accept that morality is objective, and it's not simply your personal value, but your value is actually grounded in reality, and that what other people are doing is objectively wrong. Like, why not accept that view, Mirza?
Because I observe the world and I draw conclusions. And the world looks like people, they used to support slavery, now they don't. They used to, I don't know, support genocide, now they don't. It's clear that there's no objective morality. It's might makes right. I don't want to see kids. It breaks my heart to see kids getting hurt and murdered and all that. But I just have to recognize, like 80% of Israelis agree with that.
Okay,
They're fine with it.
So if we take that logic and apply it to something else like science. Science
Right.
is constantly changing. We believe that the Earth was the center. Now it's the sun. There's been multiple theories on what an electron is. I mean, you can just go through science and you can see our scientific understanding is constantly changing. Does that mean that our
Right.
understanding is not grounded in reality whatsoever, and that it's purely subjective?
I wouldn't
To
say
where,
the science is changing. I would say we're discovering more things as time goes along. Like, it's not
okay, good. So if there's a real nature, real reality out there, and our understanding is what is changing, not the reality itself, why not apply the same thing to morality? That our understanding of
because
morality
I don't
changes, but
see
morality itself doesn't change.
because I don't see real morality out there. All I see is subjective morality. That's what I observe. That's what people are doing. Right?
No, you're seeing the response that people have. You're seeing the understanding that people have, but there still is the understanding that we have about something. So our understanding of
Right.
slavery. So our understanding
So
of
right.
slavery changed, but did slavery itself change? Like, our understanding of the electron changed, but the electron is not changing. Our understanding of the orbit of our planets changed, but the orbit of our planets did not change. So slavery itself
So
did not
so
change, but our understanding
our
of it did.
understanding, yeah, our understanding didn't change on its own, like our morality did. We took measurements, we made predictions, and I can make predictions. Like if there's one universal morality, then some things would be always wrong, and nobody would argue for them. Like slavery, like
Okay.
genocide in Gaza, like
All right.
But
Wait,
if right,
I got 5 minutes left, and someone else just called in, and so I want to get to them in the last second.
okay,
I'll give you
all
the
right.
final word. Is there something that you want to end with, Mirza?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Hey, Mirza, good to chat with you as always. I'll see you again next time.
Great to chat. Bye.
All right. So let me jump over here to Nick. You got a couple minutes left in the Nick. So, hey, welcome. And what's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I was curious about. So I think I fall in the camp of thinking objective morality exists, in some way, but I'm curious. Like, are you like a divine command theorist, or what's your kind of moral there?
I'm not a divine command theorist, in at least the sense of where God can command anything to be good. I believe that God's commands are limited by his nature. So he is good, and therefore his commands will flow from his good nature. And so I think his nature, so to speak, confines or restricts that which he can command. So he could not say, like, for example, God cannot say sin is good, because it is not.
Yeah, and I guess could you maybe describe a little bit about the nature God has? Like, what are some of the attributes of the nature he has?
What are some of God's attributes?
For example, like someone who's really mean, I might say they have the nature of being vindictive or spiteful. I guess you would say God's nature is like inherently loving and merciful. Is that kind of what you would go for?
Yeah, the typical attributes of God is all powerful, all knowing, all good, loving, merciful, compassionate, just, kind, gracious. Yeah,
Got it.
there's a lot of different attributes. Yeah,
I think my one concern here, just I'm not going to keep asking you questions. I'll just kind of lay out my view and let you respond.
you're good.
Um, what I'm sure you're familiar with, right? Like, does God command it because it's good, or is it good because God commands it?
Yeah,
And oftentimes people use nature as like a way to get around that, right? It's like a third way. It's his nature. But I
right.
think what I've heard, which is, um, let's say God's nature is loving and like merciful and peaceful, then you can kind of do a Euthyphro dilemma against his nature, and you could go, okay, but is having a nature of loving, merciful, and just good because it's God's nature? Or is God's nature that was set because it's good outside of God? So it's kind of like a Euthyphro applied to the nature of God. So I'm curious if that makes sense.
Yeah, someone commented on one of my videos just last week or so when I was in Colorado that asked something similar. And they said that my response of saying God's nature is the standard and that's how you get away from the Euthyphro. They said, well, you didn't answer anything because you're still not saying why those things are good. And so
Right.
my question back was, well, what is the Euthyphro dilemma trying to solve, or what is it asking? And ultimately the dilemma itself is saying, why is something good? I don't think it's asking the question, what is good? And so that's a question. Well, why is this thing good? Is it good because God commands it, or is there a standard outside of him? And so the solution of saying God's nature is the good, I think does solve the dilemma and is a real answer that gets us somewhere to say, why is it good? Well, because that's what God's nature is. It does, though, leave open the question of asking the question, well, what is good? And I think that is the deeper question of saying, okay, but why, what is good? Not just why is that thing good? And I think that's what you're asking here.
Well, I think what I'm asking is in the same way that you would not accept that God could command something terrible, right? You just said at the beginning, like God couldn't command it. I think what I would say is, let's say there was a God who everything is true about God, but his nature is vindictive and cruel and spiteful. Well, I would just say his nature is not good. Like it is true that it's God's nature, but even so, examine what is God's nature and decide externally whether that nature is good or bad. In which case, I think his nature can't be the thing that's the standard, because you and I, if God had vindictive, cruel nature, we'd go, well, that's not very good.
Yeah, and I think, and this came up, I think about a month or so ago. I think James had called and asked something similar, and there's been debates on like the evil God theory. And it's like, well, what if God is actually evil? Then, what does that look like? And back then I'll have to say something similar to what I said then is like, I've listened to those debates and I was thoroughly convinced that actually is not possible for God to be actually an evil being. And I don't remember all those reasons off the top of my head. And so I have to go back and listen to those debates and do a further discussion on it. But I think that ultimately when you look at the moral argument for God's existence, I think that we have and I think even the conversation with Mirza that I was just having is that we have a fundamental understanding of right and wrong. And for the most part, we can agree, and we all kind of understand it. And it's not that difficult to wrap our minds around. And yes, there may be gray area, or yes, there may be some debate here or there, but if we just say, whatever, just rape, or we talk about slavery, whatever it may be, torturing babies for fun, we can go, oh, okay, yeah, that's wrong. And so the question is, if there's actually objective moral duties and values, and we recognize that value of goodness, and something has to be the ground of that. And I don't think that an evil God theory can properly ground objectively good values like life and love and these sort of things. And so I think that it's a reflection of reality that if the world had a God that did not have a good nature, but it had an evil nature, I think that we would live in a drastically different world, and we would have different observations than the ones that we have. And so I think that the observations that we make, the way that we understand morality to function now, does ultimately go back to requiring God's nature to be good. And therefore that is the standard that we would draw back to. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it is something I want to go back and look into, of that
Sure.
different hypothesis of the good God versus evil God.
Do you mind if I throw in one? Great answer. I just want to throw in one alternative solution that I came up with, and leave it with that. One other possibility.
Sounds good. Yeah.
I think I'm like a non-traditional theist, so I don't have to hold to the creeds or anything, but I tend to think that maybe goodness just does exist as its own like platonic metaphysical thing, and then God would be the one being who has perfect access and perfect knowledge of it. And so we rely on God as this communicator of what's right and wrong, and then he is aware of that because goodness is like this external source. Now, technically, some theists are committed to divine aseity, where like there can't be anything outside of God. But if you're open to that, I think it solves the dilemma as well. But just one other option.
Yeah, and there may be other ways to solve it. And I know that I've interviewed Christian Platonists here that would agree at least that there's some sort of Platonic realm. And so there's different, absolutely, as you're pointing out, there's different ways to make sense of it. I guess my focus has often just been like on the more fundamental basic question of is there a objective right and wrong? Is there actually objective good and bad? And then how does God ground that versus a secular view that says, well, if there is no God, then there's no objective right and wrong, and therefore it's opinions or preferences or values that are subjective. And maybe I've done less work than I should have on thinking through the different ideas of Platonism and whatnot on grounding all of that. So I do appreciate it. And I do want to go back, and maybe that should be something I do in July, is go back to those evil God debates and kind of share some opinions I have on that. So awesome, Nick. Well, good to chat with you. And thanks for calling in. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the time. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye. All right, everybody. Well, hey, that should be a show, a future topic of the show. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining. Just so appreciate it. It's good to be back after a month being gone. Again, next week is going to be looking at the Christian worldview and the next part of our series here, as well as the next part of this series is going to be on transgenderism and a lot of other topics and fun things I want to discuss, like maybe my mission trip to Colorado last week and chat with some atheists, and then also the evil God, good God debate. So if those sound like fun topics you want to continue to think well about, check those out and subscribe and like and follow, and for all that kind of fun conversation, as well as there's Think Well merch if you want to help kind of sponsor the show. I do all of this commercial free. There's no commercials that are going to interrupt your show. I don't advertise anything on the show. I don't have YouTube put commercials in. The only commercials that you get are the ones that are required by YouTube at the beginning. Otherwise, this is 2 hours of no ads. And so if you want to kind of help support the show, you can do so by going to my website, think-well.org, and there's some merch you can buy, or you can donate, and different things like that. So anyways, I appreciate it. So good to be back, and I will see you again next week. Have a good rest of your week, everybody, and continue to think deeply about God, Christianity, Jesus, because these things are worth thinking about. See ya.